Hello, welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I really want to talk about what's been going on in the labor market. We got the state jobs report out today. I also want to talk about what happened with the Texas legislature passing their property tax relief bill and what that looks like. And also I want to talk about how Tennessee just released their conservative Tennessee budget, which is also an important part of this. And finally, I want to talk about an antitrust paper that I just released with the Pelican Institute, talking about the need for competition. So today is July 21st, 2023. Thank you for joining me here again. Remember, you can find the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com and always at my website, vanceginn.com. So be sure to check those out and subscribe to the newsletter. That way you get these videos right in your inbox as soon as they're ready to go. I waited a little bit later to release this one because the state jobs report was coming out. I wanted to give some key information of what's happening there and everything else. If you missed this week's Let People Prosper show, is with Dr. Bob Murphy. It was a great discussion talking about the Austrian business cycle, interest rates, inflation, malinvestments, a lot of great stuff in there. I hope that you will go back and check it out if you have not already. This upcoming Tuesday on the Let People Prosper show will be Dr. Judy Shelton, who has been working with the Federal Reserve issues for a long time and money supply, what is money, things of that nature. It was great to get her take on a lot of this, so please be sure to check that out as well. So without further ado, let's start off with the state jobs report. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they put out the state jobs report, usually the third Friday of every month. And what they say was the unemployment rates were lower in June in 11 states and stable in 39 states in the District of Columbia. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported today. 22 states had jobless decreases from a year earlier. 8 states and the district had increases, and 20 states had little change. The national unemployment rate, which is 3.6%, changed little over a month and was the same as in June 2022 of the previous year. So they always do the previous month based on the household survey, payroll survey, getting all this information in to tell them exactly what's going on in the labor market in each one of these states. And so this is a good overview of what's happening. It says non-farm payroll employment increased in 5 states, decreased in 2 states, and was essentially unchanged in 43 states in the District of Columbia. Over the year, non-farm employment increased in 41 states and was essentially unchanged in 9 states in the district. So basically that means statistically significant. Was there much of a change year over year? They're not showing very much in several of these states. What's interesting, though, is when you start to look at the amount of jobs that were being created. So year over year, so from June 2022 to June 2023, Texas added the most jobs at 542,500 jobs, with a 4% increase year over year, which was tied for the fastest job growth rate, which I think the rate is really what you want to look at because you have all these different size states. So, of course, Texas has one of the most jobs being added. When you look at total number, it's got 13.9 million people that are employed. The only one that's greater than that is California at 18.1 million, but their job creation rate was only 2.2%, about half of what it was in Texas. Florida, another big state that we want to look at, was at 3.4% year over year. New York, the other big state, was at only 2.2%, right back there with California. These big tax, big regulation, big spending states, progressive states are just not having the same amount of job creation as the more conservative, more free market friendly states like Texas and Florida. And you also look at Louisiana, which I do a lot of work with. They added 50,000 jobs over the last year, which was a 2.6% growth rate year over year. So that was more in line with kind of the U.S. average, but well below some of the other places, especially when you look at some of the other states in the South. You could see that they're falling behind some there, 2.8% in Arkansas, for example. When you look at the labor force, this is another key thing we want to keep an eye on. In Texas, the labor force has increased about 400,000 over the last year. So pretty substantial increase. The unemployment rate in Texas is at 4.1%. So it's been rising a little bit, but it's still pretty low, especially when you've seen such a large increase in the labor force. California labor force has also been increasing over time, closer to about 200,000 there in California. From June 2022 to June 2023, the unemployment rate there is 4.6%. It's also been increasing. It's up from 3.9% last year. So more people are joining the labor force and not finding as many jobs. And so we're starting to see some of these unemployment rates tick up. When you look at Louisiana is actually up about 30,000, about 25,000 in the labor force. And the unemployment rate has ticked up to 3.6% from 3.5% year over year. So really statistically unchanged year over year. But the labor force is one that we're continuing to watch. Just over the last month, it was down 4,000 in Louisiana. It was basically back to where it was in April of 2023. So not a good sign there, as we want more people in the labor force, stop this out migration of people. It's one of the needs for some good pro-growth policies to happen. When you have so many other people that are moving to states that are in the South and not to Louisiana, it shows how policies really do matter. And it's something that they really need to get under control. And also, when you look at the jobs that have been created, the non-farm employment sector, that was the household survey where you get labor force and unemployment and everything else. But the non-farm employment report, shows that in Texas, they added about 30,000 jobs just in the month of June, which is pretty substantial, right? When you look at Louisiana, there were only 400 jobs that were added on net just for the month. In California, there were about 12,000 jobs that were added. So it's starting to slow down their pace of job creation there as well. Florida added about 6,000. And New York, they added about 20,000, almost 30,000 there as well. So it's something to look at for all these jobs and what's happening, where are the jobs being created. And what we continue to see is more jobs have been created in the more free market oriented states like Florida, Texas. Tennessee also had 9,000, which is quite a bit for their state, right? Given the lower population there. And so this is something that really want to take an eye and make sure that we follow as we move forward in making sure that people prosper, right? That's the whole idea here. The second thing I wanted to talk about was, Texas, we've been talking about this some already, but Texas did go ahead and pass their property tax relief plan. They didn't do it during the regular session, although there was a lot of talk. They had a called special session by the Texas Governor Abbott. They did pass it then. They didn't pass it then. And then so they had a second special called session on eliminating property taxes and using a buy down, reducing the school M&O property tax rate to do so. And they ended up doing more than that, though, in the sense of other things that were on the table and not as much of what the governor actually called for. So he had to change the call to include other items. And so what they ended up doing was passing a tax relief bill of tax cuts of about $13.3 billion. $12.7 billion of that was going towards property tax relief of the school M&O property taxes, with about $7 billion of that going towards reducing the school M&O property tax rate by 10.7 cents, raising the homestead exemption from 60,000 to 100,000. There was also what they're calling a circuit breaker, but really is just an appraisal cap of 20% on non-homestead properties, and adding 3 people that are elected positions on appraisal boards across the state. That was really what they tried to do with the property tax relief. But that $12.7 billion, right, is less than the $14.2 billion that was passed in 0809 or for 0809 period of reducing the school M&O property tax rate from $1.50 to $1. So a 33% tax cut there instead of the 10.7% now. If you take into account inflation since 0809, you're looking at it being closer to $21 billion that they would have needed for the largest property tax relief in Texas history. But even the 12.7 isn't even as much as the 14.2 non-inflation adjusted. So this is not the largest property tax relief in history, as many people will argue. And we've seen this a lot in the social media and everything, but it is the second largest property tax relief in Texas history, which is still nothing to be, shy about. I think that is something that should be mentioned, but I think we need to make sure that we are honest with with Texans and people, and make sure that we note that this is not the largest property tax, because I don't think they're going to see as much in relief as they otherwise would have had they passed the largest property tax relief in history. And many people are going to be, they're going to be upset because they're not getting as much relief as what they have been promised. And so I think that's one reason why going into next session, there will need to be a bigger push for elimination of the school M&O property tax rates by compression, by reducing property tax rates. And if they had done that, we would have been on a path to elimination. And unfortunately, raising the homestead exemption, doing this appraisal cap, those things are going to make it longer and harder in order for us to eliminate property taxes in Texas instead of making it easier. And so don't fall for a lot of the political pandering and talking. Make sure you look at the facts, and that's what I'm here to bring you. So that's something we want to look at there. And I'll put a new paper that I wrote for Texans for Fiscal Responsibility on the show notes page about property taxes, how it could look in Dallas and Houston and Austin in particular. And what you'll see is that the best path would have been the largest tax relief in history, which would have been a 21 billion, all for compression. That's what would have been the best path. I also have another paper out that's kind of a paper I had on my blog, but I updated it for how Texas passes the largest budget increase in Texas history, which is another reason why some of this tax relief and spending and large spending increases are not going to be sustainable. This is going to create more problems in the future, as there were large increases in the budget, whether you look at it from a conservative Texas budget viewpoint of measuring one period to the next and excluding property tax relief and stuff, or if you just look at a zero gross, a frozen budget, there were large increases, more than 20% increases in Texas. Can you believe it? Just a conservative, this would be a conservative place, and instead they're growing by leaps and bounds on their biennial budget. And this is why there wasn't enough for property tax relief and other things. In other news, the Beacon Center of Tennessee, they released their conservative Tennessee budget for 2024. And it's a great report that I helped write with Ron Schultes over there. Talks a lot about the comparisons of different states and where Tennessee ranks with Florida, Texas, Georgia, California, and New York, and a number of different measures. But it goes through kind of this conservative budget model that I put together for a number of years now of looking at how does the budget compare with population growth plus inflation. First really put out there by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights in Colorado, with Colorado is what they call the TABOR, right? That's the acronym for it. And what you see in most states is that they're growing by more than population growth and inflation. Their budget is. Some states will look at the comparison between the total budget, called all funds, compared with population plus inflation, or just state funds, exclude the federal funds, and just look at that. For Tennessee, they look at the all funds, which is my preference because you look at the full footprint of government. And Tennessee was actually doing pretty good until 2022. They had been matching or been below population growth plus inflation, but then it's went well above that the last 3 budget cycles. But it is starting to rein it in, I think, over time. And it's a good reason why they need the conservative Tennessee budget out from the Beacon Center to really define the narrative of where they should be. And it puts a threshold, the maximum amount that should be appropriated in the next session coming up next year of $59.45 billion, which is a 5.8% growth rate based on population growth plus inflation over the last year. And so I think this is going to be a key marker that they need to make sure that the legislature stays within, so that way they can have more prosperity. And third here, and finally, I released an antitrust paper out with the Pelican Institute, Antitrust and Enforcement, letting markets work without empowering government. And I was honored to write this with Ted Belima, who is an antitrust and competition fellow with the Innovators Network Foundation. And we went through a lot of the history of antitrust, the different court cases that have been heard and how changes have been made over time, and really focused on the consumer welfare standard, which is a good objective metric to use to figure out whether consumers are being made better off by different mergers and acquisitions and the share of the market that these different businesses have. And look, from my perspective, the only way that there's a monopoly is if government has control of the market, whether they are the one entity or they have regulatory capture that keeps other businesses out where there's a lot of barriers to entry. Because otherwise, whenever you have open free markets and you allow for businesses to compete with one another, or the expectation that there could be a business, the risk of there being a business in the marketplace, that forces you to keep lower prices, better quality products, to be more competitive. So that way you keep other businesses out. And if that's the case, the consumers are being benefited the most, right? Whether they have more profit or not. We've heard a lot from the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission's chair, Lena Khan, talking a lot about greedflation, talking a lot about, they own too much of a market in particular markets of particular businesses. And what they are failing to see is that profit and loss are so important in a capitalist system. And too many of them have fallen for the socialist sort of route of not looking at profit and loss. And we need to get back to that. And one of the key quotes that we have here on page 5 says, without a clear and principled standard, consumer welfare standard, antitrust violations may be whatever the government enforcers want them to be. Antitrust enforcers could use antitrust laws to favor some businesses over others, pursue agendas never seen in antitrust enforcement, and even punish political opponents. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing so much of this happening right now that it's an unfortunate situation. And, whether it be in the big tech sector where people are saying they're a monopoly, which they're not, or other things. We have so much competition that's out there. We need to be removing barriers so that there is more competition, not in creating more barriers by government influence in the marketplace from a top-down approach, which is really what antitrust is. And again, I think we need to be focused on increasing competition, making sure that we have the best system possible, because that's what will ultimately let people prosper. So those are the three big things this week on This Week's Economy. Until next time, have a prosperous day.